The Jonnu Smith situation remains at a standstill with the two parties going into the dreaded dead period of the summer, which means we're going to continue to explore Jonnu Smith's breakout season under a microscope to figure out where each party should be on the spectrum.
You are Locked On Dolphins, your daily Miami Dolphins podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, Miami, welcome to another episode of Locked On Dolphins. It is your team every day here on the Locked On Network. I'm your host, Kyle Krabs, lifelong Miami Dolphins fan, host of Locked On Dolphins, co-host of Locked On NFL Scouting, author of Touchdown Miami on Substack, and an NFL staff writer for A to Z Sports. Want to give a special welcome and shout out to our everydayers because it is your team every day. We don't just say it, we live it. You're on the Locked On Network. Today on the show, we are putting Jonnu Smith's production under a film/analytic microscope, with the objective being more context. We know why the Dolphins brought Jonnu Smith in last year, and it's because they caught a whole bunch of soft umbrella coverage last year in 2023, and they didn't have anybody underneath who could punish you for playing a whole bunch of soft space football. Well, Jonnu Smith was that. Jonnu Smith was second on the team in targets, and he had the fourth most yards after catch for any tight end in the league last year. And that production was exactly what you had in mind when you brought Jonnu Smith into the fray. The challenge was, despite the presence of Jonnu Smith, you still could not dictate terms all around in your offense the way that you needed to kind of put teams back on their heels. They were content to play the same way regardless, no matter what. And I think that's why when you look at what the Dolphins have done this offseason, it is about recalibration, realignment, the investment that has been there for the interior offensive line to try to play a little bit more of a balanced style of football. So last year it was Jonnu Smith and Odell Beckham, right? And it was, well, we'll get a better 11 personnel option, or we're going to get a better 12 personnel option. And we're upgrading the weapons without addressing the offensive line, and we'll dictate terms that way. And you ran into a glass ceiling, and now you need to go about doing it a different way for how you dictate terms when teams play you a certain way. And Mike McDaniel talks about overplay. And I think you have a chance with Jonnu Smith being an established answer to do a pretty good job of recalibrating the right pieces to be a little bit more balanced on offense. I think the big question, durability aside for a number of key players for the team, is how much of complementary football can you play? And that is in turn going to be determined by the kinds of successes and failures you have with this realignment that you have on the offensive side of the ball, and then some big questions on the defensive side of the ball. But for Jonnu Smith in particular, what I want to do is I want to kind of parse through some numbers that were eye-opening for me as it pertained to Jonnu Smith, because everybody knows how good he is with the ball in his hands. And even though John Embry talked about he left 185 yards out on the field by not just taking what was available to him and getting better in that regard, the numbers are strong. He had over 500 yards after catch in 2024, and that's what he was brought to the Dolphins to do. And when you go back to what Mike McDaniel said when they first signed Jonnu Smith, it really was good foresight for an individual piece, not the grand sum of all of the parts, but the individual piece. The quote that he had in March or April of 2024, so this was over a year ago, Mike McDaniel. I think the biggest thing is that Jonnu is fast, dynamic football player, but what I love is he provides a tonality at the point of contact. He's become a master of yards after catch, not only because of the speed, but because of the mindset. If people want to keep playing you with a lot of drop seven with depth, you can make them pay in a short amount of time. And then he can also stretch the field and do some cool stuff too. It's that drop seven concept where they're going to rush forward and they're going to play soft over the top. You fast forward to this offseason, and Mike talked about and pointed to the run game and the offensive line play not forcing teams out of that often enough. And as a result, they continued to pass the ball because that's where they felt they could have their inroads as far as moving the ball up and down the field. Jonnu had 510 yards after the catch in 2024, which is a career high. But you need to put it through the context of the number of targets that Jonnu Smith had, which was 111. It's the second most on the team behind just Tyreek Hill. That 510 yards was fourth amongst NFL tight ends, only behind the two highest paid tight ends in the game in George Kittle and Trey McBride, and Brock Bowers on a rookie contract, who is the future of the position. Those were the three players that outproduced with the ball in their hands Jonnu Smith last year. Those numbers, if for exact measures, we had Brock Bowers at 596, George Kittle at 522, Trey McBride at 513, and Jonnu Smith at 510. Tucker Kraft, the only other tight end over 366, and he had 456. So there's a pretty clear separation of the guys in the top five, and Jonnu Smith was in that bucket. But here's where the context comes in. When you look at a per catch basis, this is where it gets really interesting to me. Jonnu Smith, since he's come into the league, has only had one season in which he averaged less yards after catch per reception. So every time you catch the ball, on average, how many yards after catch do you get? He's only had one season, and it was his rookie year, in which he averaged less yards after catch per reception than what he did in 2024. Jonnu Smith, and this is all written out if you want to be able to sit down and read this. This is up over on the A to Z Sports today. He has had the 3rd, 5th, 7th, 11th, and 14th single best marks of any tight end in any year since he came in the league in 2017. 2 in the top 5, 3 in the top 10, 4 in the top 12, 5 in the top 15. Those years were 2018, 2021, 2020, 2022, 2023, and 2019. He had the second lowest, and it ranks 43rd amongst all tight ends since 2017 as far as an individual player's individual season mark. It's 5.8 yards after catch per reception. So it's pretty incredible to stop and think, well, he set a single season career high with 510 yards after catch because he got targeted 111 times. Not necessarily because he was producing after the catch at what would even be considered an equal level to his career average. That's notable. And that should give you enthusiasm if you're the Dolphins that there's maybe meat left on the bone, and Jonnu Smith on a per touch basis can be a more effective player in maximizing his yardage opportunities. And that goes back to the message that he got from John Embry, right? The challenge is, do you really want Jonnu Smith to have 111 targets again in 2025? Probably not. It's one of those things where he has the makings of an amazing counterpunch, and you know he fits within the construct of what you want to be and what you want to try to do offensively. But if it becomes the identity, then you're probably being a little too passive to just take the path of least resistance instead of dictating terms to the opponent on a week-by-week basis. So I wouldn't say that my expectation is, well, run it back, do everything the same from a passing game perspective. Jonnu Smith just get those extra yards, and he's going to have 1,200 yards, and he'll have 700 yards after catch. I don't think that's necessarily the frame of mind that we should have. But his 5.8 yards after catch per reception still ranks 7th amongst all tight ends. And the guys that were in front of him were Tucker Kraft, George Kittle, Dalton Kincaid in Buffalo, Dallas Goedert, Isaiah Likely, and Will Dissly. Those are the only names that had more yards after catch than Jonnu Smith per catch this season. So it's interesting context to kind of get a feel for how he falls on his own individual career spectrum, how even on the lower end of his career outputs, he's still very well regarded versus all tight ends across the league. But it creates the balancing act. And then you look at how he's used and where his targets came. And that's where I want to get into next a little bit with Jonnu Smith and kind of explore that element of his game. That's coming your way next here on Locked on Dolphins. So make sure you guys stick with us. Ever check your bank account and wonder, where the heck did all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, all at your fingertips, it's easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in. It's your personal CFO, which gives you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money is not just a budgeting app. It's a complete financial control center where you can track your accounts, your investments, and your spending all in one place. So you can stop managing your money and actually start building wealth. And for me, it was very eye-opening to see just how much was going into the two-door delivery service every month as somebody who works from home. So once that became apparent to me with Monarch, it was very easy to make some adjustments and then feel better about what we're putting away on a monthly basis. So take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNFL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com. Code LOCKEDONNFL for half off of your first year. I'm trying to imagine how I could set the table for what just happened for those of you who are audio listeners. And it's about 60% of the platform is audio only listeners. Trying to explain how I have an automated camera on a tripod that has like a hand recognition, like lock onto my face thing, but then also a different hand recognition sign to zoom in or zoom out. And I'm a very like liberal hands speaker. My hands are all over the place when I talk. So I'm looking at the camera. The screen's over here. I'm talking about Jonnu. And I look over here to get ready to go to break. And it's zoomed way in on my face. So for however long those of you who are watching on YouTube had like the super zoom on my face, my apologies. Let's talk about Jonnu Smith and his usage from a where he wins perspective. If I asked you how many catches Jonnu Smith had beyond 15 yards downfield, because that was the other part of what Mike McDaniel said. He talked about being able to stretch the field with his speed, which if he just authentically, he's a faster tight end. He can, in theory, stretch the field. How many catches do you think Jonnu Smith had further than 15 yards downfield last year? He ran 71 routes to those areas of the field. He was targeted 10 times and he caught 4 of them. More than half the yards from those 4 receptions came on the 57-yard coverage bust to put the Raiders game on ice, which is from this game that's on the screen behind me. So it is eye-opening from that regard to think about him as a seam-busting player, but to see the raw numbers of where he's had success with his targets. You can look across every single game that Jonnu Smith has ever played in, and you can look at his production on those opportunities 15 yards or further down the field, which is what I would generally classify to be like the field stretching elements at the tight end position. He's caught 4 touchdowns, but this is since 2017, mind you. He has had 48 targets, and he's caught 19 of those 48 targets. I'm not a math guy, but I know that's less than 50%. Let me get the exact number. Somebody who is a math person is screaming at me through either their headphones. It's 39.5%. So it's a under 40% catch rate on those targets downfield. 19 first downs, obviously, on 19 receptions. But his EPA per target is 0.07 since he's come into the league. It's that, which is almost like 2 expectation on a per play basis. If I go back to just 2024, his EPA on those targets was 0.44. So he was impactful, but he got very little play in that element of the game. So if you want to continue to unlock the best version of Jonnu moving forward, and he's going to exist in this infrastructure, using him in some ways that allows him to get down the field with more frequency, because you take away that coverage bust against the Raiders, and you're talking a 33% completion rate. this year, and it's 3 catches for, 48 yards. So that element was sold as part of the bill of goods for what Jonnu brings to the table when he first came in. And in reality, the targets are overwhelmingly within 15 yards of the line of scrimmage. They are not the field stretching elements of the game. They are, strictly speaking, the intermediate and behind the line of scrimmage opportunities. His EPA per target was a 1/10 of a point higher on throws within 15 yards of the line of scrimmage. And he caught, let me go from 14 yards because there's some overlap with the balls that he caught at 15 yards. 84 balls within 14 yards of the line of scrimmage. So that for me is the next frontier with Jonnu. And without that, if you're not planning on doing that with Jonnu, then I think that's where the waters really get muddy as far as how you're justifying what you're willing to offer as a compensation to keep Jonnu Smith in the fray because he wants a pay raise and how competitive it is. But the body of work is really not there. It's never been the strength of his game, despite the fact that he has a speed element to what he does for you as a football player. So that's the challenge that I have as I review the numbers and the heat map and the distribution for Jonnu Smith and where he's winning as a football player is, can I find those opportunities? And some of it is probably the offensive line, and some of it is probably, how teams are going to set their watch to your 2 receivers and taking him and putting him where those defenders are not because they're defending those other guys and finding easy completions and staying on. I get it. It's not an easy answer, but it's an answer that they have to feel confident they're going to find if they're going to do anything with this contract. Now, I want to get into one final thought here with Jonnu Smith, and it's something that was a thought that I saw raised by, I think it was Omar Kelly. The idea that if you move on from Jonnu Smith, you may as well be tanking this year. We're going to get into that after the break. Make sure you guys stick with us. So the last idea I wanted to tackle today was this assertion that if you're going to move Jonnu, you're effectively tanking. And I'd love to hear from you guys in the comments, whether you buy or sell that. Jonnu is that essential of a piece. I'm not sure. I'll say this. I agree that moving Jonnu doesn't help your prospects, in my opinion, of having the most robust offering that you possibly can. I will say this. What's interesting to me is when you look at yards after catch opportunities across the league, and you take the tight end filter off of it, and you look at every position. There was a Miami Dolphin this year who had more yards after catch in 2024 than Jonnu Smith. His name was Devon Achane. Devon Achane had he was number 2 in the NFL in raw yards after catch. And he obviously averaged a higher yards after catch than Jonnu because he had a higher raw total and he caught less footballs than Jonnu Smith did. The only player that had more yards after catch this past season than Devon Achane, and it's different when you're a running back. It is admittedly a little easier because your average depth of target, it creates more space. It's the bridge between the receivers and then the tight end who is used primarily in the core. Jonnu had an average air yards this year under 5 per target, right? It's not a field stretching element. And then Devon Achane, his average air yards per target was minus 0.4 of a yard. So when teams play umbrella coverage and they play you off and they play you with a lot of space, you have either Jonnu running stuff across the middle of the field predominantly, or sitting down over top of the ball, or running hitches, or running spot routes. And then you've got Achane, who on average across 87 targets and 78 catches averaged a target that was behind the line of scrimmage. That creates that much more extra space for you to then run. So you usually, when you just look at raw after the catch numbers, you usually see a lot of running backs high on the list because they structurally are given more space to run to. Achane had 642 yards after catch, averaged 8.2 yards after catch per reception this season. Ja'Marr Chase, the only player who had a higher number than him. Rounding out the rest of the top 20 was Chase, Achane. Those are the only two over 600. Then you had Khalil Shakir, Brock Bowers, DJ Moore, Brian Thomas Jr., Jahmyr Gibbs, Alvin Kamara, CeeDee Lamb, Bijan Robinson, Bucky Irving. There's your running back run. Jackson Smith and Jigba, George Kittle, Puka Nacua, Rashad White, Trey McBride, Jonnu Smith, who was at 17. Amon-Ra St. Brown. Those were all the players between 600 and 500. Breece Hall at 496, Justin Jefferson at 287. That's the top 20 this past year in yards after catch. Raw totals. Could you theoretically play more 21 and then have Achane take some more of the target share if you were to trade Jonnu Smith and you gave him some more sit route stuff underneath? And I'm sure they probably want to get him the ball on the run so that you give yourself the opportunity to have robust yards after catch and break angles and all that kind of stuff. So you're not just going to have him run pass protection, chip route, release, sit down right over top of the center, turn around, square up for the football, right? That was a lot of Jonnu Smith routes because he's a big body guy and take that wear and tear. There is a world in which I think you can live in where you could disperse the Jonnu targets across Devon, another tight end, whether it's Pharaoh Brown or somebody else, whether it's Jaylen Waddle needs a bigger target share this year, Malik Washington, Nick Westbrook-Achane. I think you would have enough, health willing, which is fine print that you have to read on any statement of fact about the Dolphins skill group. I think you would have enough weaponry that you could still be a efficient NFL offense. So I don't necessarily agree that it's tanking. And then like for the compensation, it's not like you're tanking for premium draft picks. We did the show earlier this week and we looked at what these teams are getting for trading tight ends. And very few are going for anything more than a 5. So it's the long-term economic flexibility would be the choice that you would be making. Now, I think the team is better served finding the right compromise. And if he doesn't want to play that game, knowing what the historical offers are at the position, then probably just having him play out the contract and being ready early in the season to have other answers and then kind of phase that back in if he's not going to hit the ground running because he's going to play hardball in a contract battle. So hope this gives you guys some more insight, not just into the numbers of Jonnu, but understanding the numbers and understanding how he fits those numbers and where there's more opportunity for those numbers to become more robust, even if the targets aren't necessarily where they were in 2024, which I think would be a good sign of a more balanced and well-aligned offense, is if, frankly, you didn't have that amount of overwhelming numbers going his way from a target's perspective. That's going to do it for us here today on the show. I'm Kyle Krabs. You can keep it locked in right here on Locked On Dolphins. It is your team. Every day, I appreciate you guys, as always, for checking out the show. Make it a great rest of your day. I'm out of here. Go Fins. I'll talk to y'all again soon.